Hello and welcome. This is just a short video showing how I removed the power steering pump from my 2003 Land Rover Defender TD5. Recently, whilst on a road trip down through France and into southern Spain, I noticed there was a slight drip at the front of my Land Rover. Initially, because of the colour of the drip, I mistakenly thought that the leak was coolant. But on closer inspection, it turned out the pink liquid that was dripping onto the floor was power steering fluid. So when I crawled underneath the Land Rover, I could clearly see that the pink liquid was coming from the power steering pump. Unfortunately, it's very difficult to get a camera shot of the actual pump because it's in such an awkward spot. I hope this picture that I'm just showing helps a little bit. Actually, looking at it now, it probably doesn't help at all, but it's worth a try. So I start by removing the cover that's covering the cooling fan and the radiator. I do this by just loosening 4 quarter turn screws and then simply lifting the cover off. Next, it's a case of removing the fan. I'm not sure if the fan really needs to be removed, but as I could do it, I decided I would to give myself a bit more space and make the job a little bit easier. So to do this, I've got these 2 spanners that are specifically made for removing the fan. One of the spanners has got 3 holes drilled in it in the same bolt pattern as the fan, and the other one is simply a spanner to undo the nut that's holding the fan on. Basically, you manoeuvre the holes on the bolt pattern spanner over the bolt heads of the bolts that are holding the fan in place. This holds the fan and prevents it from moving while you undo the main nut. And I know what you're thinking, that's easy for me to say. Once the nut that's holding the fan on is loose, it's just a case of spinning the fan off by hand. It can be a bit of a challenge coordinating all this, and as usual I'm making a right dog's dinner of it. Perhaps a different camera angle will help. It's a little bit tighter than I anticipated. Finally, I can just spin the fan off. So with the fan finally removed, it gives me more access to the pulleys and the serpentine belt. The next task is to remove the serpentine belt. I do this by engaging a socket into the belt tensioner and pushing it to the left. This in turn slackens the belt and allows me to pull it off the pulleys. Once I've removed the serpentine belt, I can now remove the pulley that's attached to the power steering pump. Here you can see the power steering pump pulley. And at this point I realised to loosen those bolts I was going to have to refit the serpentine belt so that it would allow a little bit of resistance, and that would then allow me to loosen the bolts. Unfortunately, it didn't allow enough resistance, so I've had to utilise a spanner to kind of use a counter lever action. Anyway, the bolts came undone without a lot of problems, and that allowed me to then remove the pulley. So with the pulley removed, I can now access quite easily the high pressure hose that goes into the power steering pump. The hose is attached to the power steering pump with a 22mm nut. Unfortunately, I had every spanner size except for 22mm, so I had to just nip off to Halfords and get a 22mm spanner, which was $9.99. Typically, as with all hoses, This wasn't an easy job to do. Unfortunately, the fitting that was attached to the power steering pump also came loose, which was not very convenient. After a bit of a struggle, I eventually got the nut undone. Then it was just a case of pulling the hose out of the steering pump. Once the nut was undone, it was a bit of a wriggling job to get the pipe out of the fitting that's on the side of the power steering pump. But eventually, with a little bit of perseverance, success, the pipe came out. So once the pipe was, the high pressure pipe was out of the way, it's just a case of undoing the 4 bolts that go through the bracket that hold the power steering pump to the engine block. You know, on the bracket you can see 5 bolts, but the top one in the middle is the one that holds the pump to the bracket. These 4 bolts are pretty easy to get at, and they weren't overly tight. There are 2 short bolts at the top and 2 long bolts at the bottom holding the bracket to the engine block. These bolts, along with the bolts that hold the fan on, are all 10mm. The pump comes out of its position quite easily. The next job is to loosen the hose clip that's securing the return hose. This hose clip needs to be backed right off because there are 2 bulges on the spigot that pushes into the hose, and the hose clip has to clear them. So eventually, with power steering fluid absolutely everywhere, the pump comes out. Here I'm trying to clean the pump up to see exactly where the leak was coming from, but there is steering fluid everywhere, and I've got no chance of seeing where the leak was. As this fitting on the side of the pump was loose, I'd loosened it while I was trying to remove the hose. I decided I would just have a look to see if this could have been the culprit. So I can see there is an O-ring on this fitting, but I don't think that was the culprit. I think that was looked pretty good to me, and behind the fitting was a spring-loaded piston of some description. Here I'm just removing the bracket that holds the pump to the engine block. As I said before, the bracket's just held on in the centre with 1 bolt straight into the pump. So up until now, and with the bracket removed, everything's going swimmingly. Well, swimming in power steering fluid, that is. So I don't know if you noticed, but at the beginning of this video I explained that this video was going to be about me removing the power steering pump from my 2003 Land Rover Defender TD5. I said that because it was at this point that I realised that I'd actually ordered the wrong pump. So I'm fitting the bracket here, and while I'm fitting it I'm looking at this fitting here that's just plugged off with this plastic plug, and to me it looks a little bit smaller than the one that was on the original pump. And sure enough, it definitely looks smaller, and it is smaller. It's quite a bit smaller than the original fitting. So stupidly it turns out I've ordered a pump that fits a Discovery. Obviously the hoses on a Discovery are of a smaller diameter than on a Defender. I could try and adapt this one to fit, and I probably could with that fitting that I just removed from the old one, but I don't think it would be a good idea to mess with the steering. Might be a little bit too dangerous. So I really have learned my lesson here. In future I am going to double check the part number of every part that I order for my Land Rover Defender. Also, as a precaution, I've ordered a power steering high pressure hose, just to be safe. So that's it. It's just a waiting game now, waiting for Mr. Postman. My next video will obviously be of me fitting the new power steering pump. I can't wait for that joy. So this time, not quite ready for the next road trip. For some reason, I don't think my wife will be disappointed.